The third cycle of peace negotiations between the Colombian government and the National Liberation Army, the ELN, will conclude in Havana, Cuba. Russia's government accused Ukraine at the United Nations top court of destroying a key dam with artillery strikes and affirmed that Kiev was led by neo-Nazis. In Sudan, 12 people have been killed and dozens injured in bombings over populated areas that the Rapid Support Forces have blamed on the country's army. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada, and these are the news. The third cycle of peace negotiations between the Colombian government and the National Liberation Army, the ELN, will conclude in Havana, Cuba. The latest round of peace talks began on May 2nd, hosted by the Cuban government and led by the Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez Parrilla. In it, both sides stated their hope to reach a ceasefire agreement to end decades of violence in Colombia. In this sense, the head of the ELN delegation, Paulo Beltran, said a successful ceasefire is necessary to win over the confidence of the Colombian people. Meanwhile, Colombian President Gustavo Petro announced he will travel to the Caribbean island for the closing of the third round of negotiations, emphasizing that reaching a ceasefire agreement could mean the beginning of an era of peace for the South American nation. On Thursday, the ELN requested to the hosting nation one more day before closing the talks.
Tomorrow I'm going to Cuba. I'm going to something that can be very important for the history of Colombia. I'm going to sign a paper that can mean the beginning of an era of peace in this country without any setback. It is going to be difficult, we all know it. More difficult than making war is making peace.
Brazil's Supreme Federal Court, the STF, on Wednesday postponed a decisive trial for indigenous peoples and the demarcation of their ancestral territories shortly after it resumed. Judge André Mendoza asked for more time to analyze the trial that began in 2021. According to the STF rulings, the process was postponed for 90 days. The vote will decide whether the time frame thesis is valid, which only recognizes as indigenous territories those that were occupied by them when the Constitution was enacted. In 1988, should the time frame criterion be approved, people who cannot prove that they have occupied the territories since before that date could be expelled. Meanwhile, members of indigenous communities from all over Brazil decided to camp in the capital. In this time frame, the text must still be voted on in the Senate. On Wednesday, in the city of Sao Paulo, Brazil, the Cuban government launched its tourism campaign Cuba Única, which translates as Cuba, the only one or the unique. The event, organized by the Ministry of Tourism of Cuba, highlighted the beaches, historical and cultural heritage, and Cuban values, among other attractions for visitors. In addition, hotel spaces and tourist infrastructure were presented to representatives of Brazilian tourism agencies. In order to give continuity to the events of valorization of the Cuban culture and heritage, next June 17th, Cuba's consulate in Sao Paulo will hold the first Cuban Salsa Festival. Sao Paulo is the most populated capital and with the highest gross domestic product in South America. And the Prime Minister of Russia, Mikhail Mishustin, ratified on Wednesday Moscow's readiness to expand collaboration with Cuba in strategic sectors such as oil exploitation. During the working meeting in the city of Sochi with his Cuban counterpart Manuel Marrero Cruz, Mishustin expressed that Russia attaches great importance to large joint projects. He also pointed out that bilateral trade last year amounted to almost $730 million, and that this year trade grew 9 times as compared to 2022. The minister also recalled that Cuba is an important partner in Latin America and that bilateral cooperation is based on solid traditions of friendship, solidarity, and mutual respect.
We attach great importance to the implementation of large joint projects, mainly aimed at the long term. I'm referring to the increase of oil recovery in Cuban oil fields and the modernization of the metallurgical plant in Havana.
For his part, the Cuban Prime Minister Manuel Marrero Cruz expressed his government's interest in expanding and consolidating bilateral relations between Havana and Moscow, which have been uninterrupted since 1960 to date.
Relations have always been at a high level, but in these complex times where the enemies are trying to consolidate their intention to dominate the world, I believe that we are united by many more elements to continue fighting together. I'm referring to the blockade that we have faced.
Iranian President Syed Ebrahim Raisi will begin a tour of 3 Latin American countries, Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba on Sunday. Raisi will be accompanied by a high-level delegation on this tour, which he is attending at the official invitation of his counterparts and in line with his administration's policy of promoting economic, political, and scientific cooperation with aligned and friendly nations. According to Tasnim news agency, during the presidential visit to these 3 Latin American nations, Iran is expected to sign several cooperation agreements. The Persian statesman took office in August 2021 and since then has announced plans to improve ties with Latin American and Caribbean countries. Let's take a short break, but remember you can join us on TikTok at TeleSUR English, where you will find the news in different formats, news updates and more. Other stories coming up, stay with us. Welcome back. Russian authorities on Thursday announced floods caused by the collapse of the dam at the Kakhovka hydroelectric power station have forced the evacuation of more than 4,000 citizens on the left bank of the Dnieper River, occupied by the Russian troops, and more than 1,900 on the right bank under Ukrainian control. About 2,700 houses in 15 settlements in the Kherson region were flooded, local authorities told the Russian media. There are currently 14 settlements in the flooded area, and projections indicate that around 80 villages may be covered by water. In addition, the collapse of the dam has caused serious environmental damage, and some 100,000 hectares of arable land have been flooded. Meanwhile, the mayor of the town of Nova Kakhovka, where the dam is located, announced that pumping work will begin on Thursday to restore the complex. On Thursday, Russia's government accused Ukraine at the United Nations top court of destroying a key dam with artillery strikes and affirmed that Kiev was led by neo-Nazis. The Russian authorities warned judges of the International Court of Justice that the Zelensky's administration has violated anti-terrorism laws in the current armed conflict. In the meantime, Russian diplomat Alexander Shulgin accused the Ukrainian government of having been installed after a coup d'etat in 2014, claiming they were backed by nationalists, direct descendants of Nazi collaborators. He also said Kiev's regime came to power following violence. And the Russian diplomat Alexander Shulgin accused Ukraine before judges at the International Court of Justice in The Hague of destroying the Kakhovka dam with artillery strikes.
In fact, Ukraine did it. The Kiev regime not only launched massive artillery attacks on the dam on the night of June 6th, but also deliberately raised the water level of the Kakhovka reservoir to a critical level by opening the gates of the Dnieper hydroelectric power station.
The Serbian president, Aleksandar Vučić, announced early parliamentary elections will be held in the country, but did not announce an exact date. In an address to the nation, the Serbian head of state said the vote will be held by the end of this year. The snap elections will mean voters will head to the polls for the third time in 4 years. President Vučić and his administration has been under pressure in recent weeks after two mass shootings in the national capital of Belgrade. In this sense, the opposition protesters have been demanding the resignation of Syrian government officials and the revocation of broadcasting licenses for two pro-government television networks which promote violence and glorify crime figures. In France, on Wednesday, opposition parties confirmed they will file a motion of censure against the government after the Speaker of Parliament said she will block an attempt to repeal an unpopular pension reform raising the retirement age. Mathilde Benoît, leader of the deputies of France Insoumise in the National Assembly, assured that they will be officially presenting next week the motion of censure seeking to defend parliamentary democracy in France.
When coalition groups will present a motion of censure, which should be examined, I think, early next week, and discussions are still ongoing with Liat to see if they will submit it with us. In any case, it seems important to us to make it clear that we do not accept that parliamentary democracy and democracy as a whole should be flouted in this way.
On Thursday in France, a man armed with a knife attacked a group of preschool children playing by a lake in the French Alps, injuring 4 of them and 1 adult and sending shockwaves across the country. The suspect is a Syrian man in his 30s who was granted refugee status in Sweden in April, a police source said. Witnesses described the suspected knife wielder running frantically, apparently attacking people at random before being gunned down by police near the shores of Lake Annecy. Annecy is a picturesque town in the French Alps near the Swiss border, popular among tourists and home to one of the world's most important animation festivals, which begins on Sunday. French President Emmanuel Macron has called it an attack of absolute cowardice. And the French Prime Minister condemned as unspeakable a knife attack in the French Alps and said to be shocked by the sinister.
Small children have been savagely attacked by an individual in a park. We are shocked by this despicable, unspeakable act. When children are victimized, I think we're all deeply hurt. And today our whole country is in shock. My first thoughts go out to the parents and to the children who are still in a serious condition and to the adults who were also injured. I would also like to pay tribute to the police who were able to intervene very quickly and apprehend the perpetrator. I would also like to thank the emergency services and the medical staff who immediately took care of the injured and who are still treating them. The inquiry will enable us to determine the background and profile of this assailant, and of course all the facts will have to come to light. But today is a time of emotion, and we are here with the Minister of the Interior alongside the people of Annecy to express the full support and solidarity of the nation.
Now we move on to other topics. On Thursday in the United States, smoke from wildfires in Canada has prompted authorities to issue air quality alerts. Up and down the East Coast, and people have returned to wear N95 masks, largely abandoned since the pandemic. More than 100 million people across the northeastern United States and extending west to Chicago and south to Atlanta were under pollution warnings after the smoke drifted hundreds of miles from Canada, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency said. The thick pollution delayed flights and forced the postponement of sporting events, and New York City's public schools activities were suspended. Mayor Eric Adams told New Yorkers to limit outdoor activity to the absolute necessities. The devastating fires in Canada have displaced more than 20,000 people and scorched about 3.8 million hectares of land. Around 100 French firefighters and rescue workers departed from Marseille in southern France from Quebec to help fight historic fires in Canada.
Canadians have asked for French reinforcements, and as we speak also European reinforcements, because other countries are going to follow France. We already had a bilateral agreement 4 days ago, and so we are going to reinforce the local firefighters to do what we call in our hard job edge work, since they had 150 fires currently in Quebec, including a major fire, and fires that are not under control, and so we are going to cover large forest edge, and above all to bring a contribution of personnel.
And TeleSUR English continues to grow. You can now tune in from 33 different African countries using StoreSat. Dial 461 and enjoy your Latin American alternative broadcast. One final short break and we'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. Syrian army units, in cooperation with the Russian military, eliminated 20 militants and destroyed 30 hideouts belonging to illegal army groups during a special operation. In this sense, Deputy Chief of the Russian Center for Reconciliation of the Opposing Parties in Syria, Rear Admiral Oleg Yurinov, stated that as part of a special operation to find, block, and neutralize terrorist groups operating in the southern provinces of the Syrian Arab Republic, joint detachments of the Syrian army, in cooperation with the Russian military, carried out reconnaissance and search operations in the northern and northeastern areas of the White Desert in the Homs province. Yurinov said that as a result of the operation, 20 militants, 9 arms and ammunition caches, and 30 hideouts of illegal army groups were destroyed. At least 6 people have been hospitalized, 3 with gunshot wounds during an Israeli army raid into Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. A large Israeli military convoy arrived in Ramallah late on Wednesday to destroy the home of Palestinian prisoner Islam Frog, leading hundreds of Palestinians to gather in the area to protest against the demolition. The Israeli forces fired live bullets, stun grenades, and tear gas at the crowd. In this context, the Palestinian Health Ministry said at least 6 people were transferred to a hospital for treatment, including 3 who sustained the gunshot wounds. The Health Ministry also said that at least 158 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli forces since January 2023. And in the middle of intensified Israeli army operations, bulldozers breached the United Nations demarcated blue line on the border with Lebanon. According to local media, the southern Lebanese border has been under considerable security tensions for the past few hours, following excavations started by Israeli forces in the hills of Kfar Shiba. As a form of protest, locals gathered at the site, and a Lebanese pastor named Ismail Nasser stopped the work of an Israeli bulldozer by standing in front of it with his body. In this regard, the Speaker of the Lebanese Parliament, Nabi Berri, stressed that a people with such a strong will is destined for victory, and that the occupation will come to an end. In Sudan, 12 people have been killed and dozens injured in bombings over populated areas that the Rapid Support Forces have blamed on the country's army. According to the Rapid Support Forces, the army used air power and artillery on populated areas west of the city of Salihah, raising the number of casualties. Meanwhile, the warring parties are making contradictory statements about who's controlling facilities in the capital, while fires have been reported at the Yarmouk military compound and ammunition depots. Since the start of the conflict in Sudan, 860 people have been killed, according to official medical reports, and the United Nations reports over 1.3 million people displaced. On Wednesday, Kenya will convert or turn a vast coastal forest where the bodies of more than 250 people linked to a doomsday cult have been exhumed into a national memorial site. The cult leader, Paul Nikenge Mackenzie, is facing several charges in the grisly case, accused of driving his followers to death by preaching that starvation was the only path to God. Interior Minister Kithure Kindiki stated that the forest, where grave crimes have been committed, will not remain as it was, and that the government will convert it into a national memorial, a place of remembrance, so that Kenyans and the world do not forget what happened there. Kindiki pointed out the cult's activities extended beyond Shakakola Forest, and that comprehensive, methodical, and scientific investigations had extended to a ranch in the area stretching over more than 14,980 hectares. The World Health Organization on Thursday declared an end to a nearly 4-month epidemic of Marburg virus in Equatorial Guinea. In a statement, the United Nations Health Agency declared the end of the outbreak of Marburg virus disease in Equatorial Guinea after no new cases were reported over the past 42 days, and the last patient was discharged from treatment. The Marburg virus, genetically linked to Ebola, had caused 35 confirmed or suspected deaths in the country. The highly virulent microbe causes severe fever, often accompanied by bleeding and organ failure. We have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Telegram, and TikTok. For TeleSUR English, I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.